Hello, everyone. My name is Ken Morefield, and I am the owner and current admin for the Arts and Faith website. And I'm pleased to be joined by Evan Cogswell and Prisca Bird. And we're going to talk about the formation of the most recent Arts and Faith Top 25 theme list. This year's theme for 2022 was movie musicals. Thanks everyone for joining us. Evan, I wanted to start with you since you're the one who is actually, of the three of us, participated in the most arts and faith list making, at least on the top 25 in the voting.
Okay.
How, if at all, was the making the musical list different from some of the other theme lists that you've participated in?
I think the biggest difference was the basically 3 rounds of voting. We had the nomination, we submitted a list of 10 to 20 nominees. We then, the top 10 vote getters, or thereabouts, 9 or 11, it turned out to be 10 exactly, automatically made the list. Then we had a round of voting for the remaining 15 slots. Then we had a final round of voting to rank the total of the 25 finalists, the 10 automatic ones, then the 15 that were added in the second round. So that was actually new, because most arts and faith lists, you submitted 1 round of nominations and there was just 1 round of voting in the previous and I think it was Darren who, on the path when we did the previous top 100, said we should submit lists of nominees to start the voting process, and I think that came from him. So I think that was a good addition. And I think the films that made the list were all really solid choices, the ones that made the list automatically and the final list. So that was probably the biggest difference.
Okay.
Then, I don't know, for me, this one was harder. I mean, I don't know, I've seen a lot of movie musicals, so narrowing my nominations list down was more difficult with this topic than it had been, than other past topics had been for me, but that's probably more of a personal or where my cinephilia it has brought me.
And maybe it was a little bit different for me because not seen as many musicals, certainly had seen plenty of them, but I found myself wrestling more with qualification, like, is this really a musical? As opposed to, like, say, the last one we did, which was top 25 films on growing older. I didn't really wrestle with, is this about growing older or whatnot? But there seemed to be a little bit more wrestling for me about, like, is this a good movie, but does it fit the category? Whereas I hadn't worried about that in some other ones. Prisca, was this your first of the arts and faith lists that you had voted in, or had you done one of the other ones?
Yes, this is the first one I was able to vote in, and I was excited because I love musicals.
Okay, so
and I don't need an excuse to watch one. I have to convince my husband sometimes to join me on that wonderful adventure, but it was a delight to be able to nominate. What was more difficult was, I think, parsing between what is a musical that I enjoy and what is one that actually could be seen as being meaningfully spiritually.
Could you give an example?
Yeah, so one of the things I was thinking about is, like, there's some on the list that are very overtly from, at least from like a Judeo-Christian perspective, have messages that people are immediately going to resonate with. So musicals like Cogswell. Now, it could be controversial whether you like seeing Jesus in an afro and the disciples clouds, but if you listen to the songs themselves, they're actually very theologically resonant and very worshipful. But then you have musicals like, say, Annette, which I love and did vote for her to be on the list, and thankfully it did make it the rankings. But some people might be saying, well, how's that film spiritual? We're not, it definitely has spiritual themes, but it's not overtly like one faith tradition or another.
So it sounds like I struggled a little bit more with the, is this a musical? And you struggled a little bit more with, is this spiritual, or is this spiritually significant? Evan, did you struggle with either of those, or have you sort of, figured out how to justify, your preferences on an arts and faith list already?
I didn't struggle with, is this a musical or not? I mean, there were a few nominees which I did not think should be classified as musicals. One of them, Duck Soup, a film that I love, but I don't think two short songs in it should qualify it as being a musical. So I voted against it. Then I guess there's one I nominated Mary Poppins, and I think one other person did too. And I went back and forth on how high I was going to vote for it. And I think something was Darren said about this list is a reflection of us. That was definitely one of the movie musicals that started my love for musicals back 25 or so years ago. So I figured, I wasn't sad that it didn't make the list, but I think I voted high, but not super high for it. It's because I wouldn't feel it was quite as spiritual. And I couldn't make a strong case as something else like All That Jazz, which did not make the list, or something like Umbrellas of Cherbourg, which I'll talk about when I write my review for it.
Okay.
Or even Annette, which I thought the relationship of art and humanity and the way it talks about the purpose of art and who gives a voice to, and especially in current culture of Me Too, and a more of awareness of the ways many artists have abused their power. And I think Annette does that really, really well. So I think for me that is a kind of a spiritual and something as people of faith or any faith tradition we should be aware of and have sympathy to. So I didn't have any trouble justifying Annette on the list. And when I tallied the votes, I think it got the second or third most fives of any film.
Wow. Yeah.
The most was What's Opera Doc, and I think Wizard of Oz might have been second. Then I think Annette was third, but I would need to double check the Google.
Probably the question I'm asked the most frequently about sort of the arts and faith list is like, well, what is spiritually significant, or what does that mean, both by voters and readers? And I try to push it back on voters and sort of say like, well, it means whatever you decide that it means, and let the voting reflect that. But when pushed, I usually say either a film that invites spiritual contemplation, which I think that means you can have a film that's not overtly religious in theme and still make an argument that it invites you to think about spiritual things or in a spiritual way, or a film that has been instrumental in your own moral, spiritual, or aesthetic development. And so I might think, for instance, like a film like I'm trying to think like Cabaret might not necessarily be overtly religious in nature or immediately jump out to people as spiritually significant, but is a very early film in my teen years that I encountered that made me think about moral issues, about the marginalized people in society, about the deteriorating moral effects of environment, or so in that sense, I do think a film can be spiritually significant without necessarily talking about content. Although there's usually some place in within the content that I can try to draw a line from and sort of say, this is how this is not strictly autobiographical or a film that I like, but a film that I like for reasons of impacting the moral and spiritual development. Maybe the hardest one might be something like Fame, where I do think that there is a longing for transcendence or a longing for immortality that's expressed through the constant yearning that runs through the songs and the interaction of the young people, where they're excited about inheriting or starting their starting their journey into a larger world. But even at the start of the journey, realizing that in a very Ecclesiastes way, that life is hebel, life is vapor, that it will soon be gone, and trying to wrestle with, well, what is the significance of the here and now, if there is no larger significance to my life or meaning. So even though I don't think religion is a big part of that movie, it definitely expresses spiritual ideas for me. Prisca, what does spiritually significant mean for you? And could you maybe pick a film on the list that you thought was like, exemplified what spiritual significance means for you?
Yeah, if you don't mind, can I approach this in two ways? Because
Yes,
I think
please.
on one level, as a person of faith, I have films that resonate with me as a practicing Christian.
Okay.
But then just sort of esoterically, there's films like one of the ones I'm writing a blurb for is the film Once, which, at face value is not a religious film at all. And so one of the things, so from a spiritual point of view, like someone as a person of faith looking for something that connects me to God or the transcendent, I think Godspell is one of the most meaningful films. It's one of the earlier musicals that I was introduced to through my parents, who were Jesus people in the late 1960s, early 70s. And for them, it embodied this searching of the yearning for a place within organized religion. They identified with the disciples being this group of clowns, and kind of, Jesus being this leader figure who's been ostracized and pushed out of organized faith. And like to this day, when I hear songs like, and not even the more popular ones are Day by Day or things like that, but like songs like Oh Bless the Lord and Save the People and All Good Gifts, like those are worshipful songs that are full of yearning and longing and that lift you up. And also just, who can say no to Jesus and John the Baptist doing a vaudeville routine where it's all for the best, like it's on top of what appears to be, I think, the World Trade Center. Like it's a really interesting kind of cinematic adaptation of a already kind of quirky and a bit controversial in spots musical. But when I was looking at the list and I was thinking about what is spiritual about these films that connect them, what I came up with was that a lot of them offer this transcendent experience of shared community. And it's sort of the same effect of like what you might experience in a congregation when you gather to worship, and something that we've been missing for many years because of the pandemic. But it's this idea of people finding one another. And through song and through expressing their emotions, they are able to unlock a higher level of understanding, to interweave and build community where there wasn't any. I think about this in Once, like it is a romantic musical, but it's also about two souls who love playing instruments and want to be heard, and they find each other, and in singing and performing together, they achieve this new, like they achieve a new awareness. They unlock sort of the gridlock that was in their lives. And we see this like in Summer of Soul, which there was lots of debate about whether is this a musical or is it a concert film. It was quite a buzz in the voting. But one of the things I love about that film is that, again, it's talking about the transcendent power of shared community, of being able to, this way that music brings people together and it knits their souls together and their hearts together in a way that film does that too. But even more powerful when those two forces come together in musicals. And that's something that I think all the films on the list do this in different ways. And some of them, they show what happens when that transcendent experience is turned on its head and becomes toxic. Like in Annette, we see that music as a force that tears people apart and is oppressive. But that's sort of where I was coming at it from.
It's interesting you talk about that music and that comedian, because I was thinking about that at the end of Fame as well, where instead of, most people are more familiar with the title song Fame, but it actually climaxes with I Sing the Body Electric, which is an ensemble piece, and all of these individual people who have longed for stardom or individual acclaim come together in one great chorus. But I also thought about like what you were saying, that maybe musicals rather than other movies also forge that bond between the listener or the audience and the participants. Um, because the Rocky Horror Picture Show aside, there's very few other genres where you feel free to participate with the movie, to sing, to find yourself singing along, or even dancing along, or joining with the actors and the characters, rather than just passively watching them. And I think, like, in the modern day church service, it's become more and more like spectatorship of, we watch other people do praise music, or perform, or something like that. And the movie musical actually harkens back to that more primal ability of music to do the person's is leading, the person who's performing is leading us, not singing to us or for us. So I really like that observation. Both of you have already, I think, hinted a little bit at, surprises, things that maybe you were happy made the list, or omissions. I know, Evan, you had pointed towards All That Jazz. Was there, one, I'm sorry that Gradanis isn't here, because I know what his answer would be, but was there one film that made the list that made you go, yes, I'm really glad, even though I wasn't expecting that my vote might have mattered? Or one film that you were just bummed, as much as I like the films on the list, of like, I wish we could have had room for X. So Evan, I'll ask you first. Was there one you were really happy for, or one that you
honestly,
really sad
I was
to lose?
really pleasantly surprised Fame made the list. I didn't think it was going to. I thought it just might not have enough votes. I thought people might not really appreciate it, but it had the bare minimum threshold votes to qualify, and they were all really high votes. So I was really happy about Fame. I think, as I said in my initial email, the two biggest disappointments were All That Jazz and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, which I do realize the latters may not overtly spiritual, but I think there's a critique of materialism and prosperity and wealth as your goals in life, which I do think has a spiritual component to it. So I would have argued for it on that regard, but.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned, like, materialism, as spiritual contemplation, because I mean, I argued to no avail on the 2020 top 100 list of, I've been pushing Queen of Versailles for so long, a documentary that's really about materialism and the pursuit of wealth from a dramatic standpoint. So it is, it's interesting. I didn't necessarily connect with Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, but I like the way that you're defending that, because I do think that materialism is something that we don't think of in spiritual terms as much as we should, or sort of dismiss it into that easy binary of, this is materialism and this is spiritual themes, when it's not that way.
No.
Prisca, what about you? Did you have something that you were really happy for, or was there anything that didn't make the list that made you go,
You know what? I was really happy with our top choices, and I was very glad that, selfishly, I was very glad that the Muppet Christmas Carol got its own berth. It didn't get just lumped in with the Muppet movie, because I love a Muppet Christmas Carol. I was, one of its target audiences when it came into theater, and that was what I love about, and there's a brilliant essay on Brightwell Dark Room about the composition of the songs for the film, and how they're very much part of an overall redemptive narrative for the composer. And I just think that that's so beautiful. So I'm really happy that it's on there, because I do think that movie does an excellent job of like honoring the original text of A Christmas Carol, but also making it accessible and really leaning into like, what does this rebirth mean? Like, how do you experience that in a community with puppets, which is great. But I was a little sad that Cyrano didn't make it onto the list. But I also understand it's a fairly new release and not everyone was able to see it. And also it's not spiritual so much like overtly, but what I think was interesting about it is looking at, if we were analyzing it through how does virtue play out in the film, I thought it was really interesting the way it looked at pride, and like ultimately it's pride that leads to a downfall, and looking at sort of what is love, you know, how can even pride, like how can pride corrupt something that's pure like love, that on its own would be healing and transformative, but it can have it, you know, it can be twisted. So I would have liked to see Cyrano on there, but that's okay.
Well, and Peter Dinklage, my lord, is there anything he can't do? I mean, I know this is not exactly a hot take or whatever, but I mean, I think if he, you know, it's like, I think people just sort of dismiss him as, you know, oh, okay, well, that's because of his physical stature or whatever, that, you know, that's the film that's about him. But I'm like, you know, I think if a fully sized man had the range of films that he has been in, from, you know, The Station Agent to, you know, Game of Thrones to Cyrano to singing to doing dramatic roles in terms of range, you know, if it's possible for someone to be both, you know, broadly and widely respected and still underrated, you know, I think he would fit that bill. You know, I was happy to see Cabin in the Sky. I didn't think that it was going to make it because I didn't think a number of people had seen it, and also I know when we did the growing older list, there were some concerns raised by a few voters about the racial stereotypes from You Can't Take It With You, which was a film in the 1920s that haven't necessarily aged well. And I've even seen some now. I mean, that's Cabin in the Sky is a couple decades later. And I could understand some of the criticism I've seen around the film in terms of the racial stereotyping, although I never think it quite leaned into it the way that maybe Gone with the Wind or, you know, some other films would have. And yet, even to the extent that some of them might make me uncomfortable, I think that's a good thing, because I think there needs to be a place within a list that celebrates our history, good and bad. And I mean, I just think that there needs to be a place that celebrates different forms of spirituality and not just white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. So, you know, it's good to see Sita Sings the Blues on here. It's good to see Lagan, Once Upon a Time in India, as a sort of recognition that even and I would say even Prince of Egypt, which while sometimes marketed as a Christian movie, I found to be far more Jewish than, you know, Fiddler on the Roof, as sort of a recognition to say that there are distinctives, and most of the arts and faith voters are Christian or identify with, you know, as Christian. But also recognizing that there are other forms of religious expression and spiritual expression that have created art that we can, you know, benefit from, you know. In terms of stuff that I was sad, I don't know. I mean, I guess they'll probably laugh at me, but you know, I was a little sad to lose The Greatest Showman. I know that's got a recency bias in there. But I will tell you, people who are not necessarily traditional movie people, just there's some kind of emotional connection about that film. And I think it is the the unapologetic exuberance of "This Is Me," that speaks to a generation of people who feel beaten down or marginalized by the world in general or by institutional religion, specifically, that just find an anthem that they can rally around. That, and from a Christian perspective, I think that that's a powerful message. But I will leave it to Evan or some other people who know more about music to parse some of the weaknesses. I just know that there's I just know that maybe like Prisca was talking about with the Muppet movie, that there's, or the Muppet Christmas Carol, there's just something about it where if I'm feeling bad, or if I'm feeling down or I'm feeling upset, that I can pop in that soundtrack, and I will generally find myself lifted up in a way that praise music doesn't always do for me. And I certainly think Jenny Lynn's solo song of all the stars of a thousand spotlights.
Yeah.
I actually listed that in a piece I did for the Gospel Coalition as an Ecclesiastes film, because I think it's very theologically correct in terms of talking about the inability of fame or love or even music to fill that hole in our souls that can only be filled by God. So it's one of many films that I think recognizes that hole, and speaks to the yearning that the conscious or unconscious recognition leads to, although it never quite turns to in a traditional way, the traditional Christian answer of what can fill that hole in our souls, only recognizing that some of the things that we try to fill that with don't, which, Evan, that's maybe one of the reasons why I think it would have paired really well with All That Jazz, because I think All That Jazz is a harder version of that in terms of, showing how sometimes that desperation or whatever can drive us towards, alcohol or drug. But that they're all part of the same longing, whether it's the longing in fame, or the longing in The Greatest Showman, or the longing in, All That Jazz. So I kind of miss that. I'm getting a Zoom message that we're running a little bit short on time.
Let me see if I can pull up my old school one. Give me a second.
Okay. But I was gonna say maybe I can cut off the video here, and I'm happy to keep chatting with you all or whatnot. But did you want to add anything else that would stay in the recorded part of the video? Any final comments or final words from?
Maybe just maybe a generic word about inviting people to dialogue with us about it.
Okay.
And that, I was really happy that Singing in the Rain, I was fairly confident it'd be number one or number two, potentially.
Yeah. Fiddler on the Roof and Singing in the Rain emerged as the two front runners and basically stayed there the whole time.
Yeah.
Just switching places occasionally.
But one of the things I love about Singing in the Rain is I have yet to find a person who doesn't connect with that film. Like, I've never met somebody who has watched it and been like, oh, I hate that. That didn't do anything for me. Like, people who don't like musicals love that movie.
Yeah.
And I had the joy of being part of like a 24-hour movie marathon in Vancouver, BC one time at our house cinema, and the theme of the marathon was like films about film, and they closed out at probably it's 6 a.m. The last film of like the 12 film run overnight was Singing in the Rain, and there was a bunch of like university kind of frat bros sitting behind us, and as soon as the title thing came up, they lost it and were cheering and singing along with it. And I was like, if this isn't proof of like the staying power of this film and what it can do for people. And I don't know what is. And I use it when I'm teaching my high school students, because I find sadly that many of my high school students have never seen it. And I was like, no, you need to watch this film, because it does create that sense of community and togetherness. And it's, I think like when you were saying, Ken, about films that lift your soul up, I think Singing in Rain is one of those movies. You can't watch it like and not leave it feeling better about the world or about yourself or about the community that you're in.
All right.
It reminds you.
Yeah.
You know,
Excellent. And thanks also for the reminder to extend an invitation at the end. If you've enjoyed this conversation, if you're watching and you've enjoyed this conversation and would like to enter into conversations like that with us, there's a couple ways you can do that. I mean, I invite you to the artsandfaith.com website. You'll find a form there that you can fill out there that will let you know that you're interested in. We have a Discord where we, can just do daily comments. But even if you don't want to participate in the Discord, we can at least put you on the mailing list so that you can participate in subsequent votings for different themes, different top 25s or different top 100s. So definitely, if you want to participate or want to join us, the first step would be please visit artsandfaith.com. There should be a banner in the top right of the webpage that says how to participate. Click on that and that will generate an email, and one of us, probably me, will get in touch with you. So Prisca, Evan, thanks so much for joining me.